welcome to the Earth Feels podcast.
I'm Rose.
And I'm Christine.
Welcome to Earth Feels, the podcast for people feeling overwhelmed by the endlessly gloomy climate news.
Where every week we have soul-based conversations about climate change and explore the idea that climate change may be happening for us as much as it is happening to us.
If you are ready to shift your focus and secure the future for our kids and our grandkids, then this is the podcast for you.
And yes, we do know how to spell.
So Christine and I are here at my house on Cape Cod after a couple of weeks of hiatus from recording. We did record a couple individual podcasts, traveling, and then she was traveling. And this is our first foray into actually being able to see each other's face in more than 2 years, other than across the screen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's quite fun to be here in person. Of course, as usual, we had to figure out the technical issues, and we're hoping that we have. We never actually know until it's all said and done. But it's fun to be here in person. And yeah, like Rose says, we met 2 years ago, almost to the day.
Yeah,
I think a week or two later into November, and we certainly didn't look at each other across the table and go, "That is the person I'm going to do a podcast with in 2 years."
Yeah, no, I didn't even know what a podcast was 2 years ago. Maybe even 6 months ago. So, yeah.
And so how fun to reconnect and to also connect with our listeners again after doing individual podcasts on our own the last couple of weeks. And I have to say, it's way more fun doing it with you than without you, Rose.
Yeah, it's a little weird. It's a little weird looking at, we're sharing a microphone as opposed to... and having eye contact as opposed to looking into a computer at each other. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's fun. And let's launch into today's subject, which is...
So today's question, should plastic pollution be part of the climate conversation? And this is kind of near and dear to my heart, as some of you know that I was in Greece for a couple of weeks, and I was on the island of Naxos at one point, and walking down this incredibly beautiful beach, blue-green ocean in the middle of nowhere, and there's plastic everywhere on the beach. And it is a concern of mine, and yet is it really part of the climate crisis?
Well, it's, is it indicative of what's going on with the climate? So it's both. Is it part of the crisis? Should we be talking about it in relationship to climate change? And when you mentioned this, Rose, I said, yes, definitely, let's talk about this, because it is a conversation that my husband and I have, and he's expressed irritation that people are focusing on plastic pollution when climate change and climate emergency is so much more urgent in his mind. And that really is what is going to, you can always clean up plastic pollution.
Can you?
Once so we can talk about that, but this is, I'm being devil's advocate here.
Okay, no, that's fine. I think it's a conversation worth having.
Channeling my husband, you can always clean up plastic, but once we reach the tipping point with climate, which science is telling us we have about a decade to address, then that's too late. And it doesn't matter how clean the great plastic or Pacific garbage patch is, that once we've gone over that tipping point, there's no coming back. The climate tipping point.
Well,
so
to me,
let's
it's
have
kind
this conversation.
To me, so maybe you can explain this or clarify this for me, because plastic comes from fossil fuels, and as in the States, as we are, there is some conversation about the fossil fuel industry, that we should be moving towards electric cars and solar energy versus gas or oil heating and all that kind of stuff. I mean, we're just at the very beginnings of the conversation, obviously. Yet we are building plastic factories to make more plastics. And plastic comes from petroleum. So isn't that, we're still having to extract petroleum from the earth to produce plastics? Isn't that part of the same conversation?
Mm-hmm. It's definitely plastics and fossil fuels. I mean, one can't exist without the other. I believe, though, that plastics are a byproduct of fossil fuel, the other things that we use fossil fuels for. And some of my research seems to suggest, because of the fracking boom in the US in particular, that fossil fuel companies, particularly Shell, I understand, is building new plastic production factories in the Ohio Valley.
That's interesting. Well, yeah, as they see uh, their business is waning for fuel, then obviously they've got huge infrastructure that they've got to support. So what I saw was by 2050 they expect that the plastic industry is going to like triple where it is. So plastics are still spewing CO2 into the atmosphere. They've talked about a lot of the plastics are not able to be recycled. So maybe your plastic bottle is able to be recycled at least a couple times, but it degrades every time it is recycled. The packaging industry, though, with the packaging that your already washed lettuce comes in, or your plastic wrap that you use, your saran wrap or whatever you use, those plastics are not able to be recycled. And when I was in Greece, that was the stuff that was on the beach. It was like that filmy kind of plastic. And so what do you do with that? If you incinerate it, which there's talk about taking old plastics and converting it into oil or whatever, if you incinerate it, then that spews CO2 into the atmosphere.
I wonder if it can be, and I have no idea, but if it makes it easier to capture it, if they ever perfect sort of carbon capture and sequestration, but that's a long way off. So again, to get back to our questions, should plastic be part of the climate conversation? And your argument, which is a good argument, is that yes, plastics are from fossil fuels. The reason we have so many plastics now as opposed to even 30 years ago, never mind 50 or longer, is because there's so much fossil fuel production for other things that the companies are looking to continue to make money from this product, and they by repackaging it. And I mean, honestly, plastics are super handy, and we've just gotten used to being a disposable culture and having our lovely washed lettuce in a nice plastic box.
Right.
So
exactly.
right. I would still say, playing devil's advocate, what if it feels like making that personal change with reducing plastics in your home makes some people feel like, okay, now I've done my bit for the environment, or for the climate emergency, whereas what scientists are telling us is we're rapidly approaching the tipping point. We have a decade or so, give or take a year, to ramp down our emissions dramatically, and just cutting down our plastic use isn't going to change that trajectory.
Well, I don't think it's an either or proposition. So if we're looking at ramping down fossil fuel production, if we look at no, we don't want to be using it for heating, we don't want to be using it for transportation, can we say alongside we don't want to be using it for packaging as well? Because if we're giving the fossil fuel industry a way out from, they're going to still be extracting. So the solution is just keep it in the ground. And as consumers, we are in the driver's seat. We none of this could exist unless we were complicit with it. So we are in the driver's seat if we can cut back on our consumption of plastic, if we can say no to plastic straws, plastic bags, cellophane, whatever, then I think it's a part of the conversation. It's like saying the only solution is to not drive a car. Well, no, that's not the only solution. The only solution is not to heat your house with gas or oil. No, that's not the only solution. It's got to be a myriad of lots of different solutions, and I feel like plastic is part of them.
All right, you convinced me.
I want to read a few statistics that I pulled up about plastics, just so that we can all understand the problem that we really are faced with. Since the 1950s, around 8.3 billion tons of plastic have been produced worldwide.
It's hard to even imagine what 8.3 billion tons looks like.
Yeah, and plastic weighs next to nothing. If you think about that saran wrap, I mean, how many rolls of saran wrap is that? I don't know. And luckily, in some parts of the world, using plastic is already illegal. That's a positive.
Which parts?
That would be a good thing for us to
find out. We'll find out.
73% of beach litter worldwide is plastic.
1
million plastic bottles are bought around the world every minute.
What? That's crazy.
Worldwide, about 2 million plastic bags are used every minute. Plastic is killing more than 1.1 million seabirds and animals every year. I think we've all seen those pictures of whales and dolphins and birds just filled with plastic when they find them on the beach. The average person eats 70,000 microplastics each year. So when they're talking about the garbage patch out there and that they've actually had success with in the last month or so, it's actually this boom that this young man has built and is picking up the plastics. They're talking about the plastic that's floating in the ocean. The sun is degrading it, but it's not making it go away. It's just making it into smaller and smaller pieces that then become part of our environment, be part of the marine debris environment, and then we ingest it. So 70,000 microplastics a year, and the average time that a plastic bag is used is 12 minutes. So
yeah, those are interesting statistics, and really clearly there's a problem with plastic. And I think it's really important to have this conversation because I was telling you recently I spent 5 days at Kripalu yoga retreat and attended a conversation that Anodea Judith had about her book, A Global Heart Awakening, which we are going to be talking about in the future in our podcast. And she's even agreed to be a guest on our podcast. So that's quite exciting. But as part of that, Dr. Judith made the point that we all have to respond in this time of great upheaval and crisis to what really speaks to our heart. That's our call to activism. And so I think addressing the plastic crisis in our own lives probably doesn't take as much energy as a lot of other activism, like, Fridays for the Future. You have to make your sign, head down to your local legislature and do that sort of thing.
And stand next to Jane Fonda and be arrested.
That's true. And Ted Danson got arrested.
And Sam Waterston.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So, well, maybe we'll have to do that.
In the next 12 weeks or in the next 9 weeks that Jane has committed to be arrested.
She might be there longer. We'll see.
Yeah.
But it's a start. But this doesn't take a lot of time and energy. It takes some thought because, as we were just discussing, the ease of use of cling wrap.
Oh, yeah.
In one's kitchen, one's own kitchen. By possibly, not just yourself, but other members who use the kitchen. It's
Christine is staying with me for a few days after Kripalu, because Kripalu's in Massachusetts and I live here. And we had dinner last night. And when I opened the refrigerator this morning and saw that my partner had put away the dinner makings, thank you so much, James.
Bless him.
He had wrapped them all in plastic. And I was like, okay.
And
step back. I didn't have to put it away, but make the commitment that this is the last roll of plastic wrap. And we've had it in there forever, but it's a Costco-sized roll, so...
Oh, it's a big one.
Yeah.
And so we should talk about options then. Like at our house, we haven't had saran or cling wrap or whatever you want to call it in the house probably for a couple of years now.
Oh, you set the bar so high.
Well, I never actually found I was really good at making it straight and stick on anyways. Maybe it was the cheap stuff we bought, but so we've substituted it for a couple of different things. One is silicone tops that you put on dishes, and they actually like suction on. They're quite,
so they're
like,
not the little bonnet, like the bonnet, like shower cap bonnet thing.
So I confess, when I stay in a hotel room, I do take those little and those are plastic.
That's great though, if you're taking them with you and reusing them as opposed to letting them be single use, because they're going to be thrown out if you leave
Well,
them.
that's true, and actually we really love those, and you can buy reusable ones now too. So those are good options. The silicone ones just sit on top, but they still provide a seal.
That's good. Yeah.
And I think you can get those in lots of different places. I don't want to recommend a dollar store, but I'm pretty sure you could probably get them even at dollar stores for a lot of money.
I bought the beeswax.
Yes.
And you can get those at Trader Joe's, and I put them in everybody's Christmas stocking last year, but I must confess that no one has used them yet.
They've not quite embraced the idea.
No, they haven't.
And I have to say, we, bless my daughter, my youngest daughter made us beeswax
nice
wraps for Christmas last year. And so we have quite a collection now, and I want to thank you, Emma, for that. But I have to say the silicone lids are just easier.
So they stick easier. Yeah, I think the beeswax, they're hard, and you got to kind of mold them.
You have to mold them.
Yeah.
But I think if you start to use them, that's just becomes your go-to. And certainly, I think they're as easy to use as cling wrap, which, like I said, I never really mastered cling wrap.
So not that easy to use them, evidently.
So what else do we want to say about plastic pollution? I have a quote here too from Carol Muffett, the president and CEO of the Center for International Environmental Law. And Mr. Muffett said, "One of the best ways to respond to the plastic crisis is to keep fossil fuels in the ground in the first place. And the overwhelming proportion of plastic in our lives are unrequested and completely unavoidable." In other words, they're everywhere.
They are everywhere. They are everywhere. So I have an article that I was reading in The Conversation, which is an interesting journal because it does produce essays on both sides. So, but this essay is along with what I think, so I'm going to quote it. In a climate crisis, plastic waste doesn't look like the world's most pressing environmental problem. And I think to your husband's point of view, that's probably true. But considering plastic and climate as two separate issues is a mistake. Concern about plastic pollution isn't distracting people from a more serious problem. Plastic is the problem. If we see plastic as solid climate change, they become central to the climate crisis. The quote is from Deidre McKay of Keele University. So can we just become aware? So I guess this would be an action tip, so I'm going to put this in here, and we won't be going in order, but an action tip. Can we become aware of how many times a day you encounter plastic, from the plastic in your toothbrush? Actually, I've just switched to bamboo toothbrushes, but yay. Again, part of my Christmas stocking last year, I gave everybody bamboo toothbrushes. From the toothbrush that you use in the morning to the cellophane that your Mounds candy bars come wrapped in. Whatever. It's all plastic. And what if you can become aware of how many times a day you touch it, then you can see the problem that we're looking at. And can you eliminate just one thing today that's plastic in your life? Just one.
Well, I'm thinking about, you're talking about bamboo toothbrushes, but then the toothpaste.
Right, the toothpaste. Yeah, I know, in those tubes. And weren't those tubes metal when we were kids? Were they aluminum or something? It seems like you used to be able to roll them up.
Yeah.
And now you have to have another piece of plastic to hold
Yeah.
to hold it.
Yeah. So it's unavoidable. Like this quote that I just said, plastics are everywhere. And so...
So it becomes a conscious thing. Yeah. I mean, milk used to come in bottles, right? It still does in some places, but...
And some places are going back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I read that London is actually going to have milkmen again.
I think we talked about that in one of our podcasts.
Did we? Okay.
Yeah. Okay. And what's our good news? Oh, our good news. I'm going to share it because...
You're Canadian.
I'm Canadian. And we had a federal election in October. And what the outcome was, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but a lot of people globally, even if they are not Canadian, know about our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, because I think he's one of the better looking global leaders out there.
Sorry to you, Donald Trump.
His hair is definitely not orange.
No.
And he's much fitter, and he can do amazing yoga moves. But...
Okay, that I'd like to see. Seeing Justin Trudeau do yoga.
So in our federal election, Mr. Trudeau, and he represents the Liberal Party, he and his party shrank the number of seats that they had because he has been Prime Minister for the last 4 years. So they didn't get elected with as much of a mandate, but they did get more votes than any other party, which... Yeah. And so that means that he's definitely going to be our Prime Minister again. And the Conservatives, the Conservative Party had been in power for 2 terms, so 8 years before the Liberals got elected 4 years ago. That would have been 2015. And they appear not to be very concerned about climate change
the Conservatives. So
yes.
they're more the right.
Yes, more the right, and while it was interesting because this really was the very first election in Canada where climate change was an issue that came up regularly. Thank you, Greta.
Yeah, nice.
Really, it's part of that Greta effect that we discussed, and the Fridays for the Future that have people, especially students, out in the streets, just consistently reminding people this is an issue. And so the Conservatives didn't get a majority, and in fact got fewer seats than the Liberals, but the Liberals still need to cooperate with the other parties, and they probably won't be cooperating with the Conservatives. There's 2 other parties. One is the Greens, which bumped up the number of seats from 2 seats to 3 seats, and
that's nationwide.
That's right. So it's not a lot, but in fact in British Columbia, what happened there was they only had 3 Green members of the provincial parliament elected, but they ended up holding the balance of power.
I mean, as most Americans don't even really know about our own system, and your system seems so much more complicated because it has more parties, which is incredible. I mean,
to me, your system seems more complicated because there's only 2 parties.
Yeah, the bipartisan. It seems like if there was a third party, then there could be some swing, but
which is
everything
exactly
what happens.
What is happening? So in British Columbia, the 3 Greens helped the New Democrats, so that's a little more progressive, a little more to the left.
More to the left
of the Liberal Party in British Columbia.
Okay.
The Liberals are not Liberals in British Columbia. It's very strange. And so they hold the balance of power there, and the government, which is progressive but not as climate aware as the Greens, have to cooperate with the Greens.
Interesting.
So that is what's going to happen federally now.
Yeah.
They'll have to cooperate, and the New Democrats and the Greens federally definitely have climate change on their radar. The Greens do, obviously, more than we call them the New Democrats or the NDP party. And so it's a win for carbon pricing because all of those 3 parties had carbon pricing in their platform. The Conservatives didn't.
Of course.
And they lost they didn't win the majority that they needed. So it's a win for carbon pricing.
Yeah.
Over 60% of Canadians voted for parties that support carbon pricing.
That's incredible.
So we've talked about carbon pricing before. I'll just say a little bit about it. What the federal Liberals did was put a price on carbon, and which basically is kind of a tax. But it's more of a rebate because Canadians pay a little bit more, a couple of cents more. I don't know if it's just in gas, but overall we pay a little bit more, basically a fossil fuel tax to incentivize the move away from fossil fuels. So if you drive a gas guzzling car, you're going to pay more than if you walk or bike or have an electric car because you're always filling up your gas guzzler,
Right.
and every time you fill it up you're going to pay some of that money is going to go because of the carbon pricing, it's going to go to the federal government. But the majority of Canadians, when you do your income tax, you fill out, there's a line there for your carbon credit and you get the money back, and most Canadians actually get more back than they pay.
Nice.
So it's not a revenue generator, it's an incentivizer.
Okay, so if you're not driving a car, if you are walking or biking or whatever, are you still getting, what are you getting back?
Whenever you make any sort of purchase that is covered under the carbon pricing, you'll have to pay that fee. But if you're not filling up your car every week, you're not going to be paying as much.
Okay.
But you're going to get as much back.
But you are getting as much back.
Yeah. So that's the, you'll have more money in your pocket because there's a carbon price federally. So it's staying. Yahoo!
Yay!
It was really, the Conservatives were lying about it, but they were spreading some misinformation about it. Yeah, saying that Canadians were paying more. It's hurting Canadian families. Like whatever. Even if you don't like that carbon pricing policy, do not tell untruths about the fact that most Canadians are not losing money on it. So Canadians didn't fall for it for a bunch of reasons, and we're going to continue to price carbon, and hopefully this will give the Liberals, and with them the support of the Greens and the NDP, just some more confidence to get serious about.
Well, and I like the fact that you're our neighbors and we can look to you and say, okay, it's working for them. Although that doesn't seem to help us in the healthcare, but
that's true.
But maybe it will. Maybe it will.
We've
help
legalized
us.
marijuana too.
Woo! Okay. Okay, so that's the good news, and then
we
already did the action step. So now the sanity tip is to put a moratorium on complaining. And Christine, you had a quote from Jen Sincero of "You Are a Badass" that you were going to read.
Okay. So this is Jen Sincero has written a number of books. Quite a few of them have badass in the title.
Yep.
This particular book is "You Are a Badass Every Day," and I love it. And I'm going to be incorporating many of her suggestions in the sanity tips that you're going to hear.
Sounds great.
On Earth Feels for the next while. But my sanity tip suggestion from Jen Sincero is put a moratorium on complaining today. When you catch yourself about to launch into complaining, pause, breathe, and look for the lesson instead. So, again, to sum up, no complaining today.
Just for today.
Just for today. See how that feels. I think it'll raise your vibration.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for listening.
Thank you, and we'll see you next time.
That's this week's episode of Earth Feels. Special thanks to singer-songwriter Kristen Hoffman for generously allowing us to use Song for the Ocean. Thanks for listening.
Don't forget, subscribe to our podcast on iTunes or Google Play so you don't miss an episode. Catch you next time.
Bye-bye.
Children of the earth, I'm calling out. There's a mission for you and for me. You see, our mother, she has been suffering, and the truth is told beneath the sea.